Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, a show today in the Legends platform that we have where we get to talk about some of the great players of the past, kind of appreciate what they did, and be able to share some of the great content with you here, our viewers. We appreciate it greatly. Logan Landers is our producer and engineer, and along with me, as always, Vincent Turner, our co-host and founder of 100 Yards of Football. And once again, Vincent, you give me an assignment where I've got to learn about somebody that I knew a little bit about. I could probably answer the question with half credit, but now that I've spent a little bit of time delving into our guest today, that we're going to talk about Paul Vernon Hornung, I appreciate it greatly because now I've got a much better appreciation for his talent, for his ability, and more importantly, what he did to help make the National Football League a better place.
Appreciate all the kind words today, Mr. Harper LaBelle, California YA. Paul Hornung was one of my favorite athletes when I was growing up in my little teen years, running around in the dirt over there at 763 Dunn Avenue, being raised by my parents, Chester and Inez Turner. And I never forget this. When I was in the first grade, you know how you go to the library and they take you to the library your first trip? And I ran over to the sports section. I got this book about the Green Bay Packers dynasty. In the first page, it had the Golden Boy from Louisville, Kentucky, Paul Hornung on the front of it. And I really kind of studied his career. And he would go down as one of the most versatile football players that's played in this league because he was a kicker. And another tidbit that I'm going to say, but I'm going to give it back to you, Hawk.
Well, I'm a little ashamed that you didn't go to the index cards and learn how to do a bibliography. You just went straight to the books, Vincent. So your first trip to the library and mine were completely different. You were out there having fun and reading, and I had to learn about how the library worked and where to be able to find books under the Dewey Decimal System or whatever they called it back in those days. But no. Paul Vernon Hornung was born on December 23rd, 1935. So in the midst of the Great Depression. Now, his mother, Loretta, and father had some arguments. They didn't get along very well. And in her 8th month of pregnancy, she left Queens, New York. There was an apartment that the two of them shared, and she moved back to her home in Louisville, Kentucky. Her father owned a grocery store, and she and young Paul Jr. Lived there in an upstairs apartment during most of his early life. Paul's grandfather, Loretta's dad, died when he was about 2 or 3 years old, and that grocery store needed to be sold. And the Hornungs, the young family of 2, had to move a couple of times. They lived with a widow who had a small apartment and wasn't able to provide. They slept on army cots in separate beds in a small living room there for a year or 2. He moved around a couple of more times, and they eventually found an apartment where he went to high school, and his mother stayed there until after he was done at the University of Notre Dame. But he had a rough childhood, this young man did. Didn't have a whole heck of a lot, but, he was always grateful and humbled by the fact that even though his mother had a couple of jobs, she was a clerk, she was a typist, she worked for an Army medical facility for a little while. But she saved her nickels and dimes, and he always had a bat or a new glove and a pair of shoes where he could play with the boys and work on his skills and his techniques. He did meet his father. Dad caught up with him when he was about 13 years old, and he had been drinking. His father was prone to whiskey, if you will. And Paul Sr. was going to get up and make a move on Loretta that wasn't quite nice. He was a little upset at the moment. And Paul Jr. stands up in between his father and his mother. He says, "What you do to her, you'll have to do through me first." And that's the first day that I think he became a full-grown man at a very young age. His father and him never had another argument after that. I think his dad kind of learned his lesson. They would meet up every now and then when he was in high school, and every time that they had dinner together, Dad would give Paul $10, sometimes 15. Paul would always take that money home and give it to his mother. So Very interesting background that he had. When he was in fifth grade, Vincent, he played football at, I believe it was St. Charles Catholic School. It might have been St. Patrick's. Let me look this up. And it was St. Patrick's in Louisville. And Father William was the head coach. And Paul said Father William knew absolutely nothing about football. So he was just there to kind of chaperone and supervise. But Paul, as a quarterback playing for the eighth grade team, learned very quickly to call his own plays and to learn the game in a different way. And it really helped him. By the time he was an eighth grader, he excelled. He played some soccer during that time as well. So he learned how to kick a ball. So he could kick, he could throw, he could run. He could do just about everything. And back in those days, as you well know, Vincent, the guys were two-way players. So he played a little bit on defense, but he really excelled as an offensive player. He was a little bit faster than some of the other guys. He was bigger at 6'2" when by the time he reached Notre Dame, about 215 or 20 pounds. This guy was a full-grown athlete, and he could do so many different things. You have to have him on the field. But is it Flagett or Faglet High School? Flagett, when he was growing up as a kid, that's basically his background. And he played well enough that some of these other guys got a chance to see him. Pat Leahy being the coach at Notre Dame, and he invites him to the University of Notre Dame. And next thing you know, he signs and becomes part of the Irish.
I think when you look at Paul Hornung, and as you just mentioned, he was a tremendous athlete early in his age. The one point that's going to stick out in my mind was the 1956 Heisman Trophy. His team went 2-8 that year, and he still won the trophy. From losing team, I believe he's the only player in the history of the Heisman that came from a losing team. But what makes that so special to me is that look at some of the people he beat out for the trophy that year. A legend in the state of Tennessee, Johnny Majors, Tommy McDonald, who was an outstanding player, Boomer Sooner, University of Oklahoma, Jerry Tubbs, another Boomer Sooner, Oklahoma alum that finished in the top 10, John Arnett out of USC. We ain't heard that name before, have we, Hawk? From our fellow friend out there in California, Mr. Stephen Travers. How you doing today, sir? John Brody out of Stanford, and the great legendary Jim Brown. Think about that list of people he beat out for the Heisman. So that's telling me, I'm going to call him the Golden Boy. He was really a special football player that did everything for Touchdown Jesus, Notre Dame University. Back to you, Hawk.
It wasn't an easy decision for him. There was a guy named Paul Bear Bryant who was at the University of Kentucky. And because Paul grew up in Louisville, Bear Bryant wanted him to go to Kentucky. Bud Wilkinson wanted him to go to Oklahoma.
Yes.
Maryland, Michigan State were all in play. His final decision boiled down to Kentucky, Indiana, of all places, and Notre Dame. And when Paul ended up making his decision, he said the one thing that had the greatest influence over all of it was his mother wanted him to go to the University of Notre Dame. So he ended up going there, and Pat Leahy was the coach. They had some good seasons, but you're right, Vincent. His final year at Notre Dame, they were 2-8. That's the worst record I think Notre Dame has ever had. So it wasn't always easy there. He would go across the lake to St. Mary's on occasions to go visit maybe a young girl to take her out to dinner and enjoy the company. But his time at Notre Dame, obviously, great player, terrific athlete. Even though the team itself wasn't fantastic on all occasions, they were good. And you'll notice here in the picture that Logan has up, he wore number 5. His favorite player when he was growing up was Joe DiMaggio, and he wanted to wear Joe's jersey and at least have his number. And so he picked that, and it got to stay with him throughout all of his days. But he played great at Notre Dame, well enough to be a first-round draft pick and to end up going to Green Bay. He had quite a career there with the Packers.
There's no question about it, though. You ever heard that saying, a player goes to the right situation and the right coach comes in? Think about it. Paul Hornung was totally a different opposite type player back then, but he got Vince Lombardi, who we all know how great a coach he was. Them two clashed a little bit, but when they came together, look at that run the Packers had in the 60s. And one thing that I'm going to say about this to show you how special a player Paul Hornung was. Not only was he a great running back, he also had skills coming out of the backfield catching the football. But most of all, in 1960, the year I was born, he led the NFL in points scored 176. That's special, man. That's a player. Back to you, Harvard.
Oh yeah, he had the stats, I guess, speak for themselves. But 1957 in the draft, he goes to the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, his relationship with Vince Lombardi, with Bart Starr, with Jim Taylor was just about to take off. The Packers had already been a pretty good football team, but he ends up winning 4 NFL championships. It took a couple years to develop that, though, Vincent. In 1961, that's the first time that the Packers end up winning it. Now, they had played the year before against the New York Giants and lost, but back then there were 8 teams in the league at the beginning of the 57 season. It was going to grow. It was going to expand and get a little bit bigger, but the West and the East were divided in terms of the divisions, and the Packers were winning the West just about every year. They play the Giants usually or Philadelphia. He was in the 60 championship game. They lost that year. The Packers did to the Philadelphia Eagles, but in 61, 62, 65, and then 66, they win the championship. And then he did play in the very first Super Bowl. Well, I'm sorry. He had a neck injury, a pinched nerve. He was dressed, but he wasn't on the field. So he does have a Super Bowl ring, and that's the very first one that was awarded by the National Football League in terms of the Super Bowl. It's just an amazing career that he had, a fantastic runner. Rushed for 3,711 yards. He averaged 4.2 yards per carry, Vincent. 50 touchdowns. He had 130 receptions, another 12 touchdowns that he scored. Points leader in numerous years, MVPs. I mean, this is a guy that in the time where the league was really growing and expanding, and you were getting new teams out in California, you were expanding with the Missouri market, with St. Louis coming in, and obviously with some other teams that were mainstays. Paul Hornung and his ability to be able to run and avoid getting hit, and being able to hit somebody right in the smack in the nose and knock them back. He was a fantastic player that the Packers and certainly Vince Lombardi appreciated being around.
When you look at this game and you look at the National Football League and all the great players, and Mr. LaBelle, I consider you a class of elite because you played 11 years. And I'm going to get to my point. Paul Hornung played at a time, and look at all the great players the Packers won their championships against. Way Tittle, Alex Webster, Cal Rhodes Sr., Roosevelt Brown, the great Sam Huff. They beat the Giants twice with that team to win championships, the Packers did. Then in 65, beating the great Cleveland Browns that had Mr. Paul Warfield, Gary Collins, Frank Ryan. I don't have to say no more. The man from St. Simons, Georgia, the great Jim Brown. And during that time, as I mentioned earlier, as we started the video today, I was just growing up, starting to really like this game, the NFL. And as you just mentioned, Hop, the NFL right then, it was really growing as a popularity. But them players that played then, it was about that mud. It was about that grit. Wasn't a lot of speed in the game. It was man on man, power on power. And Paul Hornung was doing this thing at a high level under one of the greatest coaches in the game, Vince Lombardi. It's got my juices fired up because in 2 weeks, I'd be 17 years old. I might go give me a Green Bay Packer uniform and get out there and reminisce. Back to you, Mr. LaBelle.
Well, he played hard, but he lived a little bit harder. There were times where people would estimate that he had anywhere from 20 to as many as 60 different drinks a day. Jerry Kramer was one of his buddies, one of the great offensive linemen there, a Hall of Famer with the Packers. And they were known to go right after practice was over to the local distillery, if you will, and hang out for a little bit. Green Bay is such a small town, and when I was there for training camp back in the mid 90s, it's not hard for anybody to say, well, what is there to do here? Right. So if you go to practice, you go to work, you do it, and then there's not a whole lot. It's not a big town. And so Paul found himself, much like his dad, on the other end of a bottle. He'd get suspended. He'd have some issues. There were some times where he would either do or say some things that weren't always in line with NFL standards. But that was his life, and that's what he got to know. And you know, dating pretty girls and being the golden boy, as you mentioned, he got to enjoy a few of the fringe benefits of that type of lifestyle. But part of it too was they were so good, the Packers, and it wasn't easy. I know Jerry Kramer, for example, or Bill Curry, or even Bart Starr. They would all have issues with their head coach, Vince Lombardi, at one point or another. He was so tough. I mean, Vince Lombardi is a guy that could talk about 27G, a single running play, for hours on end. And he had done so. He went to a lecture once where he was the keynote speaker, and he spoke for 5 hours about 27G nonstop. And then everybody took a break for lunch. And when they came back, he finished up for another 2.5 hours to finish what he was talking about regarding everybody's responsibility. Probably repeated himself a few times, but the importance of that single play was certainly part of the Packers' legacy. And you can tell that guys would get bored with that. And so Paul would go out, and sometimes he would stay out a little bit later than what normal people would. And by that, Vincent, I mean usually about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. But there was never a challenge with his athleticism or his ability to play. He had great hands. He could throw. He didn't throw a lot, but he could. He was a high school quarterback and did a little bit of throwing at Notre Dame. But again, just being a part of one of those great teams that the Packers ended up being lifelong domination in a short period of time that we still talk about today, how good they were. The championship games, you mentioned Cleveland. I mentioned the Giants and the Baltimore Colts. They would play in some of the great games ever. And Paul Hornung was a tremendous part of that, especially from the offensive side of the ball.
My final words today about Paul Hornung is this right here. He's one of the most enjoyable football players that I've read about and studied about. Outstanding career, man. When you go back and look what the Packers done in them 60s, I believe 4 NFL titles, 1 Super Bowl. And the most important aspect I'm going to remember about Paul Hornung is that he was an exceptional, versatile athlete. Did it from the running back position, and he was a kicker, and a pretty good kicker, and played under one of the toughest coaches that's ever coached in the NFL, who some people still consider the best to ever done it, and Mr. Vincent Lombardi. Back to you, Hawk.
Well, he played 9 years for the Packers. In that last 66 season where he hurt his neck, the Packers released him. He signed with the New Orleans Saints, but regrettably didn't get to play a single down with them. He decided to retire. And then afterwards, when you write the book, like, what do I do when I'm done? What am I going to do when I'm no longer a Packer? But television career, he was in the limelight for a while. He worked for TBS, CBS, ABC. He even worked for the Minnesota Vikings, the dreaded Vikings, if you're a Packer fan. But he was inducted into several different Hall of Fames. Let me read these out to you. The Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, 1975. He's a member of the National High School Hall of Fame, the Wisconsin Athletic Hall of Fame, the Louisville Catholic Sports Hall of Fame. I don't know if he attended that one sober. I certainly hope he did. As well as the Packers Hall of Fame. But the ones that are the most important, at least to what we're talking about here, the ones that really made a difference, the College Football and the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Paul Hornung was a part of that. He was a Super Bowl champion, 4-time NFL champion in 1961, 62, 65, and then in 66. He was the most valuable player in the National Football League in 1961. And 2 times he was an All-Pro first team. He was a second-team All-Pro again in 1959, went to 2 Pro Bowls. He was the rushing leader. 3 times he was the scoring leader. He won the Burt Bell Award in 1961, the Heisman Trophy in 1956, the Chick Haley Award in 56, the Consensus All-American in 1955 and 56. Tell me what you've done for me lately, will you, Paul? What an amazing career. So, Vincent, we get to honor a guy that really was one of the first, along with Frank Gifford, one of the first guys that became a celebrity as a football player in a way that we hadn't seen before. Paul Vernon Hornung ends up dying on November 13th, 2020, after a long, successful life. And we honor him today for all the great things that he was able to do for the National Football League, for college football, and for high school as well.
when you think about the NFL and you think about the Green Bay Packers and you think about the history of this game, Paul Hornung should be in the top 10. Outstanding football player, good looking guy, and I'm always going to love that nickname, the Golden Boy. Can't go wrong. And you just read off all the accomplishments that he's done. This man was a very special person, a very special football player. Back to you, Mr. Harper LaBelle.
Yeah, and we appreciate everything he did to make the game a little bit better. It wasn't always easy. It wasn't always perfect, but the game itself and the contribution that he made to it is one worthy of us talking about, at least. So we hope you learned a little bit more today about Paul Hornung, the Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi, etc. Notre Dame, going back to Louisville High School or Louisville, Kentucky, and going to high school out there. All kinds of very interesting tidbits that we wanted to share with you here today. So for Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, for Vincent Turner, our co-host, our founder here at 100 Yards of Football, I'm Harper LaBelle saying thank you for tuning in, everybody. We appreciate you being a part of our Legend Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a fantastic rest of your day.